The silence in the Blackwood was a living thing. It wasn't the absence of sound, but a presence, a heavy, watchful hush that pressed against Elara's eardrums. Every crunch of her boot on the bed of decaying pine needles echoed like a gunshot. She'd ignored the faded no trespassing signs nailed to the gnarled trees at the forest's edge, rationalizing it as outdated. This land was too vast, too wild to belong to anyone. Yet, now, deep in its heart, she felt the unmistakable sensation of being owned. Or, at least, being watched by something that thought it owned everything it touched. It was a feeling she'd been chasing for weeks, a desperate need to escape the 4 gray walls of her cubicle, the endless drone of her computer, the quiet ache of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. This compulsion to walk into the heart of the forbidden forest was just the latest, most dramatic expression of a yearning she couldn't name. A shiver that had nothing to do with the evening chill traced a path down her spine. She pulled her jacket tighter, her fingers pausing on the zipper. Her heart was doing a strange, erratic dance against her ribs. It wasn't fear. Not quite. It was a low, thrumming anticipation, a magnetic pull in her blood that had drawn her off the marked trail an hour ago. It was stupid, reckless even, for a seasoned hiker like her, but the compulsion had been irrational and absolute. "Just over the next ridge," it whispered. "See what's there." The light was fading, painting the world in shades of slate and deep green. She should turn back, make camp where she'd left her pack. But her feet carried her forward, each step sinking into the thick carpet of pine needles. Then the wind shifted. It swept through the trees, a cold sigh that made the branches groan, and it brought with it a scent. It was musk, deep and earthy, like damp soil after a rain. But underneath it was something else, something sharp, metallic, and utterly wild. It was the smell of lightning about to strike, of dominance, of pure, untamed power. Elara froze. Her breath hitched in her throat. Every hair on her arms stood up. Her rational mind screamed, "Predator," but her body reacted with a shocking, visceral jolt of heat that pooled low in her belly. It was terrifying and thrilling all at once. A twig snapped to her left. She spun around, her flashlight beam cutting a frantic path through the gathering gloom. Nothing. Just the skeletal fingers of birch trees. "Hello?" she called out, her voice swallowed by the immense, waiting silence. The only answer was the whisper of the wind, and then the feeling intensified. The weight of a gaze, so intense it felt like a physical touch sliding over her skin, raising goosebumps in its wake. It traveled from her hiking boots, up her legs, over the curve of her hip, across her chest, and finally settled on her face. Panic, cold and sharp, finally began to pierce the strange trance. She took a step backward, then another. A shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows between 2 massive pines. It didn't step out, it unfolded. A man, so large he seemed to distort the space around him. He was all brutal, sculpted muscle under a simple black Henley and dark jeans that did nothing to hide the sheer power of his frame. His arms were crossed over his chest, the fabric straining over his biceps. But it was his face that stole the air from her lungs. It was all harsh, unforgiving angles framed by dark, unruly hair. A jagged scar ran from his temple down to his jaw, a pale slash against his tan skin. And his eyes, they glowed, a faint, unholy gold, like embers in the twilight. They were not human eyes. They were the eyes of a wolf, pinning her in place with a look so feral, so possessive, that she couldn't have moved if the ground itself opened up beneath her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The promise of violence, of absolute control, radiated from him in waves. He took one step forward, then another. His movement was silent, fluid, a predator's stalk. He came to a stop mere feet from her, so close she could feel the heat rolling off his body, so close she could drown in that wild, storm scent that was now unmistakably his. He leaned in, his head dipping toward her neck. Elara flinched, bracing for an impact that didn't come. Instead, he inhaled deeply, his nose skimming the air just beside her pulse point. A tremor went through his entire massive frame, a shudder of pure, unadulterated shock. When he straightened, the look in those golden eyes had changed. The cold assessment was gone, replaced by a blazing, tumultuous storm of panic, recognition, and a rage so deep it seemed to shake the very trees around them. His lip curled back from his teeth in a silent snarl. The sound that finally ripped from his throat wasn't a word. It was a guttural, choked, animal thing. "What are you?" The command was raw, laced with a fury that felt like it was directed inward as much as at her. It was the sound of a man whose meticulously controlled world had just been obliterated in a single devastating breath. And Elara knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone and set her blood on fire, that her life had ended the second he caught her scent, and a new, terrifying one had just begun. Chapter 2: The Weight of Gold. The question hung in the air between them like a blade. Elara's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her brain scrambled for an answer, for anything that made sense, but the words died in her throat under the weight of his stare. Those golden eyes burned into her, searching, dissecting, demanding an answer she didn't have. She tried again, her voice coming out as barely a whisper. "I don't understand." His expression darkened, and he took another step closer. The space between them evaporated until she could feel the heat radiating from his chest, could smell that intoxicating scent of storm and wild places that seemed to emanate from his very skin. "You don't understand," he repeated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You trespass on my land. You carry a scent that should be impossible. And you stand there telling me you don't understand?" His hand shot out, fingers wrapping around her wrist before she could think to pull away. The contact was electric, sending a shock of sensation racing up her arm and straight to her core. Her knees nearly buckled from the intensity of it. But it was nothing compared to the look that crossed his face the moment his skin touched hers. He went rigid, his pupils dilating until only a thin ring of gold remained. A sound escaped him, part growl, part groan, and his grip tightened. "Impossible," he breathed, more to himself than to her. Elara tried to pull free, panic finally cutting through the strange lethargy that had held her captive. "Let me go!" No. The word was absolute, final. His other hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing along her cheekbone with surprising gentleness. "You're coming with me." "Like hell I am!" The fear crystallized into fury, and she yanked backward with all her strength. But it was like trying to move a mountain. He didn't budge. Instead, he smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing she'd ever seen. All sharp edges and predatory satisfaction. "You can walk, or I can carry you. Your choice." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Elara looked around desperately, but the forest had become alien, hostile. The path she'd taken was already lost in the gathering darkness, and even if she could find it, she knew with bone-deep certainty that she would never outrun him. "Who are you?" she whispered. Kael Shadowmoon. The name rolled off his tongue like a claim of ownership over everything it touched. Alpha of the Shadowmoon Tack, and you, little trespasser, are about to learn what that means. Before she could respond, he moved. One moment she was standing on her own feet, the next she was thrown over his shoulder like she weighed nothing. The world tilted, and she found herself staring at the ground, his shoulder blade pressing into her stomach. "Put me down!" She pounded her fists against his back, but it was like hitting stone. He started walking, his stride long and sure, despite the uneven terrain and the burden of her weight. "Keep fighting," he said, and there was dark amusement in his voice. "It only makes this more satisfying." The casual arrogance in his tone sent fresh rage coursing through her veins. She stopped hitting him and instead dug her nails into his back, raking them down as hard as she could through the fabric of his shirt. He didn't even flinch, but she felt the rumble of laughter in his chest, and it made her want to scream. They traveled in tense silence after that, deeper into the forest than Elara had ever been. The trees grew larger, more ancient, their branches forming a canopy so thick that moonlight barely penetrated. The air grew heavier, charged with something primal and wild that made her skin prickle. And throughout it all, she was acutely aware of him. The steel cable's strength in the arm wrapped around her legs, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the heat of his body burning through his clothes and into her skin wherever they touched. It should have been terrifying. It was terrifying. But underneath the fear was something else, something that made her belly clench with a heat that had nothing to do with anger. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, the trees began to thin. A warm glow appeared ahead, and then they emerged into a clearing dominated by a massive wooden structure that was part cabin, part fortress. It was built into the side of a hill, with stone foundations and walls of thick timber that looked like they could withstand a siege. Warm light spilled from the windows, and smoke curled from a stone chimney. Despite its imposing size, it felt organic, like it had grown from the forest itself. Other buildings dotted the clearing, smaller cabins, what looked like a garage, and structures she couldn't immediately identify. But it was clearly more than one person's home. It was a compound, a settlement, a pack house. Kael carried her up a flight of stone steps and through a heavy wooden door without pausing. The interior was as impressive as the exterior, all exposed beams and stone, decorated with furs and what looked like handcrafted furniture. A fire crackled in a massive hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. It should have been welcoming. Instead, it felt like the lair of something dangerous and barely civilized. He finally set her down in what appeared to be a living room, his hands lingering on her waist for a moment longer than necessary. When she stepped back, he let her go, but his eyes tracked her every movement like a hunter watching prey. "Welcome to your new home," he said, his voice deceptively calm. Elara rocked her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how small she was in this space, how isolated. "This isn't my home. You can't just kidnap people." "I didn't kidnap you." He moved to the fireplace, turning to face her with his back to the flames. The light outlined his powerful frame in gold and shadow, making him look even more imposing. "I claimed what's mine." "I'm not yours." "Aren't you?" He cocked his head, studying her with those unsettling eyes. "Tell me, Elara, what brought you to the forest tonight?" The fact that he knew her name sent ice through her veins. "How do you..." Your scent carries more than just your essence. It carries your name, your desires, your very soul. He took a step toward her and she instinctively backed away. So tell me, what called to you? She wanted to lie, to deny the strange compulsion that had driven her off the trail. But under his stare, the words came tumbling out. I don't know. I felt pulled, like something was calling to me. Something was. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The same thing that's been driving me half mad for months. The scent of my mate, carried on the wind, always just out of reach, until tonight. Mate, the word hit her like a physical blow. That's not possible. I'm human. Yes, the word was heavy with implications she didn't understand. That's the problem. Before she could ask what he meant, he was moving again, crossing the room in 3 long strides. She turned to run, but there was nowhere to go. His hands caught her shoulders, spinning her around to face him. Do you feel it? His voice was rough, strained. This pull between us? This need? She wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. Not when his hands on her shoulders sent electricity racing through her body. Not when every cell in her being seemed to be screaming at her to get closer to him, not farther away. I feel something, she admitted, her voice barely audible. The mate bond. His thumb traced along her collarbone, and she shivered. For my kind, it's absolute, sacred. When we find our mate, we claim them, protect them, possess them. The possessiveness in his voice should have terrified her. Instead, it sent a dark thrill through her core that left her breathless. But you're human, he continued, his other hand coming up to tangle in her hair, which means this bond should be impossible. Which means you're going to drive me insane trying to understand what you are. His grip tightened in her hair, tilting her head back to expose her throat. She felt his breath against her pulse point, warm and dangerous. But first, he murmured against her skin, I'm going to show you exactly what it means to be claimed by an alpha. The promise in his words sent liquid heat pooling between her thighs, even as every rational part of her mind screamed in protest. She was trapped at the mercy of a man who wasn't entirely human, in a place where no one would hear her scream. And God help her, part of her didn't want to scream at all. Kael, she whispered, not sure if it was a plea or a prayer. He pulled back to look at her, and the raw hunger in his eyes made her knees weak. Say it again. Kael. He groaned, low and deep, and then his mouth was on hers, claiming her with a kiss that was all heat and dominance and desperate, consuming need. Chapter 3. The Storm Within. Kael's world fractured the moment their lips met. The wolf inside him, the primal beast he'd spent decades learning to control, roared to life with a savagery that threatened to tear him apart from the inside. Mine, it snarled, claws raking against the cage of his ribs. Claim her, mark her, make her understand. But his human mind recoiled in equal measure. This wasn't supposed to happen, not with a human, not with someone so fragile, so breakable. The mate bond was sacred among his kind, a gift from the moon herself that bound 2 wolves together for eternity. Humans weren't part of that equation. They couldn't be. Yet here she was, her scent filling his lungs like the first breath after drowning, her pulse hammering against his lips as he kissed her with barely leashed desperation. She tasted like storm clouds and defiance, like everything wild and untamed that his wolf craved. Elara's hands pushed against his chest, but the resistance was weak, confused. He could smell her fear, sharp and metallic, but underneath it was something else, something that made his control slip another notch: arousal. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She was afraid, yes, but she was also responding to him in ways that should be impossible for a human. Her body knew what her mind refused to accept. He broke the kiss, breathing hard, his forehead pressed against hers. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated, lips swollen from his attention. Beautiful, terrifying, his. "This is madness," he growled, more to himself than to her. "Then let me go," she whispered, but even as she said it, her fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt. The contradiction nearly undid him. He could feel the mate bond pulling tight between them, a golden thread that grew stronger with every shared breath. It was agony and ecstasy wrapped together, the promise of completion and the threat of destruction. Outside, thunder rumbled across the sky, and the first drops of rain began to patter against the windows. The storm he'd scented earlier was finally arriving, as if nature herself was responding to the chaos inside him. "I can't," he admitted, the words scraping his throat raw. "The bond won't let me." Before she could respond, footsteps echoed from the hallway, followed by a sharp knock on the door. Kael's head snapped up, a growl building in his chest. The interruption felt like sandpaper against his frayed nerves. "Alpha." The voice belonged to Marcus, his beta and oldest friend. "We need to talk." Kael closed his eyes, fighting for control. The last thing he needed was pack business when his world was spinning off its axis. But duty called, and an Alpha's responsibilities didn't pause for personal crises. "Stay here," he commanded Elara, his voice rough with barely contained need. "Don't even think about running. In this storm, in these woods, you wouldn't last an hour." Her chin lifted in defiance, but she didn't argue. Smart woman. He moved to the door, opening it just enough to step into the hallway and pull it closed behind him. Marcus stood waiting, his usually calm expression tight with concern. "What is it?" Kael demanded. Patrol picked up scents along the eastern border. "Bloodfang pack." Marcus's jaw clenched. "They're testing our boundaries again." The news hit Kael like ice water, cutting through the haze of desire and confusion. Victor Bloodfang had been circling like a vulture for months, waiting for any sign of weakness. The bastard wanted Shadowmoon territory, and he wasn't above starting a war to get it. How many? At least 6, maybe more. Marcus glanced toward the closed door. Is it true what the pack is saying about the human? Kael's eyes flashed gold. What are they saying? That she's your mate, that she carries your scent. Marcus lowered his voice. "Kael, if Victor finds out." "He won't." The words came out as a growl. "A human mate is seen as weakness among the other packs. They'll view it as proof that our bloodline is tainted, that we're no longer worthy of our territory." Kael knew his beta was right. In the brutal politics of pack hierarchy, perception was everything. A human mate would be seen as a liability, proof that the Shadowmoon Alpha was losing his edge. But looking at it from a tactical standpoint, Elara was also a vulnerability he couldn't afford. Victor would see her as the perfect target. Hurt the human, break the Alpha. "Double the border patrols," he ordered. "I want eyes on every approach to the compound. And Marcus?" He met his beta's gaze. "This conversation doesn't leave this hallway." Marcus nodded and melted back into the shadows, moving with the silent grace of his wolf form. Kael stood alone in the hallway, listening to the storm rage outside and feeling the tempest inside him grow stronger. When he returned to the living room, he found Elara standing by the fireplace, her arms wrapped around herself. She'd been listening. He could tell by the tension in her shoulders. "I heard," she said, without turning around, "about the other pack." "Then you understand the situation." He moved to pour himself a whiskey from the bar cart, needing the burn to ground him. "You're not just a captive anymore, you're a target." She finally faced him, and the fear in her eyes had sharpened into something more complex. "Because of this bond you think we share?" "I don't think anything. I know." He downed the whiskey in one swallow. "The question is what we do about it." The rain hammered harder against the windows now, and lightning illuminated the room in stark flashes. Elara looked ethereal in the firelight, like something conjured from his darkest fantasies and deepest fears. "You could let me go," she said quietly, "before this gets any worse."
Kael laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You still don't understand, do you? The bond doesn't work that way. Even if I could force myself to release you, which I can't, you'd never be safe. Not now. Victor will have caught your scent by morning. He'll know what you are to me." The color drained from her face. "What you are to me?" She repeated the words like a curse. "And what exactly am I to you, Kael?" He set down his glass and moved toward her, drawn by the invisible thread that connected them. When he stopped just inches away, he could feel her heartbeat in his own chest, could taste her fear and arousal on the air between them. "You're my mate," he said simply, "my other half, the one person in this world who can either complete me or destroy me utterly." Her breath caught, and he saw the moment the full weight of her situation hit her. She was trapped, not just in his house, not just by the storm, but by forces beyond either of their control. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. "Neither did I." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing the delicate line of her cheekbone. "But we don't get to choose our fates, little wolf. We only get to choose how we face them." Chapter 4. Heat Lightning. The nickname sent an unexpected jolt through Elara's system. Little wolf, as if he could see something in her that she couldn't see in herself. "I'm not a wolf," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. How could she explain the way her body responded to his proximity? The way her pulse quickened, not just with fear, but with something primal and hungry. "Aren't you?" His golden eyes searched her face. "Then why can you feel the bond? Why does your scent call to mine across miles of forest?" Before she could answer, another flash of lightning split the sky, followed immediately by thunder that shook the windows. The storm was directly overhead now, nature's fury matching the tempest building between them. And then the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing the room in a dim red glow that made everything look like a fever dream. Kael's eyes glowed brighter in the darkness, reflecting the light like a predator's. "Perfect," he muttered, but there was something in his voice that suggested the power outage was anything but convenient for his self-control. In the crimson half-light, with the storm raging outside and the mate bond humming between them like a live wire, Elara felt something shift inside her. The civilized woman who'd hiked into these woods was being stripped away layer by layer, replaced by something more elemental. "You're afraid of me," she realized suddenly, "not the other way around." Kael went very still. "I'm not afraid of you." "No? You're afraid of what I make you feel." She took a step closer, testing this new understanding. "You're afraid you'll lose control." His jaw clenched. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Another step. She could smell the tension rolling off him now, sweat and adrenaline and barely leashed desire. "You've spent your whole life being the alpha, being in command, but you can't command this, can't you?"
Lightning flashed again, illuminating his face in stark detail. The careful mask he wore was cracking, revealing the raw need underneath. Elara. Her name was a warning. "Show me," she whispered, surprising herself with her boldness. "Show me what it means to be your mate." The words hung in the air between them like a thrown gauntlet. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Kael's control finally snapped. He moved faster than should have been humanly possible, backing her against the stone wall beside the fireplace. His hands braced on either side of her head, caging her in, his body a wall of heat and power pressed against her. "You don't know what you're asking for," he growled, his face inches from hers. "Then teach me." He made a sound that was part groan, part growl, and then his mouth was on her throat. Not gentle, not careful, claiming. His teeth scraped against her pulse point and she gasped at the sharp pleasure-pain of it. The mate bond flared to life between them, a connection so intense she could feel his heartbeat as if it were her own. Through that golden thread, she experienced an echo of what he was feeling, the desperate hunger, the need to mark and claim and possess.
"I can feel you," she breathed, her hands fisting in his shirt. "Inside my head. How is that possible?" "The bond," he said against her skin, his voice rough with strain. "It's getting stronger." His hands found her waist, lifting her until her feet left the ground. She wrapped her legs around his hips instinctively, gasping at the intimate contact. Even through their clothes, she could feel the evidence of his arousal, hard and demanding against her core. "Kael," she moaned, her head falling back against the stone. The sound seemed to drive him wild, his hips pressed against hers in a rhythm as old as time itself, while his mouth worked its way up her throat to capture her lips in a kiss that was all fire and desperation. Through the bond, she felt his internal war, the man fighting for gentleness while the wolf demanded possession. The duality of his nature was intoxicating, dangerous, everything she'd never known she craved. His hand slipped beneath her shirt, calloused fingers tracing the curve of her ribs, and she arched into his touch with a sound that was half gasp, half plea. The mate bond pulsed between them, demanding more, demanding everything. "Say you want this," he growled against her lips, his voice strained to breaking. "Say you want me." "I want," she started, but her words were cut off by a sharp knock at the door. "Alpha!" Marcus's voice was urgent, cutting through their haze of desire like a blade. "Victor's forces are moving. They're heading straight for us." Kael tore his mouth from hers with a curse that would have made sailors blush. He set her down carefully, his hands lingering on her waist as if he couldn't bear to let her go completely. "How long?" he called out, his voice remarkably steady for a man who'd been on the edge of claiming his mate moments before. 20 minutes, maybe less. They're using the storm as cover." The practical part of Elara's mind knew this was serious, but her body was still thrumming with unfulfilled need. The mate bond stretched taut between them, demanding completion, making it hard to think about anything else. Kael seemed to be fighting the same battle. His eyes kept flicking back to her, gold bleeding through the human brown. "Get the pack ready," he ordered Marcus. "I'll be there in 5 minutes."
Footsteps retreated down the hall, leaving them alone again. But the spell was broken, reality crashing back in waves. "I have to go," Kael said, though everything in his posture suggested he'd rather stay and finish what they'd started. "I know." She smoothed down her rumpled shirt, trying to regain some semblance of composure. "Will you be safe?" The question surprised them both. Somewhere in the space of a few hours, her feelings had shifted from fear to something far more complicated. "I'm an alpha," he said, but his expression softened slightly. "I don't go down easy." "Good." The word came out fiercer than she'd intended. "Because if you die before we figure this out, I'll never forgive you." A smile ghosted across his lips, the first genuine one she'd seen from him. "Is that a threat, little wolf?" "It's a promise." He moved toward the door, then stopped, looking back at her. "There's a bedroom upstairs, second door on the right. The windows are warded. You won't be able to break them, so don't try, but you'll be safe there." "And if you don't come back?" His eyes flashed. "I will. I have something to come back to now." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the storm and the lingering scent of pine and lightning and promises that might never be kept. Chapter 5. Blood and Moonlight. Elara paced the bedroom like a caged animal, the mate bond pulling at her chest with every step Kael took away from the compound. Through the connection, she could feel echoes of his emotions, cold determination, protective fury, and underneath it all the constant thrum of need that mirrored her own. The bedroom was clearly his. His scent saturated everything. The dark wooden furniture, the midnight blue bedding, even the air itself. She should have felt invaded by the intimate space, but instead, she felt strangely comforted, as if she belonged here. Thunder crashed overhead, and she moved to the window, pressing her palm against the glass. In the distance, she could see lights moving through the forest, flashlights and probably some kind of night vision gear. The pack was mobilizing. A sudden sharp pain lanced through her chest, so intense she gasped and doubled over. Not her pain, his. Through the bond, she felt Kael's rage spike, felt the moment his humanity gave way to something far more primal. The change was happening. He was shifting. Images flashed through their connection, fragmented glimpses through wolf eyes, silver fur gleaming with rain, the metallic taste of violence in the air, enemy wolves circling, their eyes reflecting the lightning. Then the bond went quiet, and panic flooded her system. "No," she whispered, pressing both hands against her chest, as if she could somehow hold on to the connection. "No, don't you dare die on me!" She was halfway down the stairs before she realized she'd moved, driven by an instinct she didn't understand. The front door stood between her and the forest where her mate was fighting for his life. Her mate. When had she started thinking of him that way? The door was locked, of course, but desperation made her resourceful. She searched until she found a key ring hanging by the kitchen entrance and tried keys until one clicked home. The storm hit her like a physical blow the moment she stepped outside. Rain lashed her face, and wind tried to knock her off her feet. But she pushed forward, following the pull in her chest that led toward the forest's edge. She could hear them now, the sounds of battle, snarls and howls, the snap of jaws, the thud of bodies hitting the ground. Her rational mind screamed that she should go back, that she'd only be a liability in a fight between supernatural predators. But the mate bond overrode rational thought. It demanded she go to him, protect him, stand by his side regardless of the cost. Lightning illuminated the clearing ahead, and she saw them. Wolves. Dozens of them, locked in brutal combat. They were massive, far larger than any natural wolf, and their eyes glowed with intelligence and fury. Silver fur mixed with black and brown and red, a tapestry of violence painted in moonlight and rain. She spotted Kael immediately. Even in wolf form, he was unmistakable, larger than the others, his silver coat marked with distinctive black streaks. He moved like liquid death, all grace and power and lethal intent. But he was outnumbered. Bloodfang wolves circled him, working in coordinated strikes to wear him down. Blood matted his fur, and she could feel his exhaustion through the bond.
Elara looked around desperately for something, anything she could use to help. Her eyes fell on a fallen branch, thick as a baseball bat and heavy with rain. It wasn't much, but it was something. She crept along the edge of the clearing, staying in the shadows. One of the enemy wolves had separated from the pack, stalking toward Kael's blind spot. She could see the attack coming, could feel Kael's focus locked on the 3 wolves in front of him. There was no time to think, no time for fear. Elara raised the branch and brought it down with all her strength across the stalking wolf's skull. The impact sent shockwaves up her arms, but the wolf staggered, shaking its massive head in confusion. It spun toward her, lips pulled back in a snarl, and she saw her death in those glowing yellow eyes. But before it could spring, Kael was there. He hit the enemy wolf like a freight train, jaws clamping around its throat. The sound of bones breaking was audible even over the storm. The battle shifted after that. Seeing their packmate fall seemed to break something in the Bloodfang wolves. They began to retreat, melting back into the forest as quickly as they'd appeared. In moments, the clearing was empty, except for Shadowmoon wolves and the bodies of their enemies. Kael prowled toward her, still in wolf form, his eyes never leaving her face. Blood dripped from his muzzle, and she could see claw marks raking his flank. But he was alive, and the relief that flooded through her was so intense it brought tears to her eyes. He stopped just inches away, his massive head level with hers. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Woman and wolf, human and supernatural predator, 2 halves of an impossible whole. Then, the change began. It should have been horrifying to watch. Bones cracking, flesh reshaping, man emerging from beast. But the mate bond let her feel what he felt, the strange relief of returning to human form, the way both shapes felt equally natural to him. When it was over, Kael stood before her, naked and magnificent, rain washing the blood from his skin. His eyes were still more wolf than man, and when he looked at her, she saw something that made her breath catch. Possession, gratitude, and a hunger that had nothing to do with the battle he'd just fought. "You saved my life," he said, his voice rough from the change. "You would have done the same for me." "Yes." The word was absolute. "But you're human. You shouldn't have been able to do what you just did." She looked down at the branch still clutched in her hands, then back at him. "Maybe I'm not as human as we thought." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, hope, and beneath it all the relentless pull of the mate bond that demanded completion. "Elara," he said, stepping closer. She dropped the branch and met him halfway. When their lips crashed together this time, there was no hesitation, no fear, only need and recognition and the absolute certainty that they belonged to each other. The rain fell around them like a blessing, washing away the blood and violence, leaving only the truth that burned between them like a flame that could never be extinguished. Chapter 6. Surrender. They made it back to the house in a haze of desperate need and barely controlled restraint. Kael had found clothes, jeans and a shirt someone had left by the tree line, but his hands shook as he dressed, the mate bond singing between them like a live wire. The pack had dispersed to tend their wounded and secure the perimeter. Victor's forces were gone, but they'd be back. This had been a test, a probe to measure Shadowmoon's strength. But all of that faded to background noise the moment they were alone again. "You're bleeding," Elara said, reaching toward the claw marks on his chest visible through his torn shirt. He caught her wrist, his grip gentle but firm. "I'll heal. We always do."
We? The question hung between them, loaded with implication. In the heat of battle, she had moved like a wolf, thought like a wolf, felt the pack's pain as if it were her own. The evidence was mounting that she was something more than human, something that shouldn't exist. "I don't understand what's happening to me," she whispered.
"I know." He released her wrist, but his fingers trailed along her palm, sending electricity up her arm. "But we'll figure it out together." The promise in his voice made something tight in her chest finally loosen. For the first time since this all began, she didn't feel alone. He led her upstairs to the master bathroom, a space as imposing as everything else in the house. Stone tile, a shower large enough for two, and a bathtub that could have doubled as a small pool. "Let me see," he said, gesturing to the cuts on her hands from the branch. She held them out, and he examined the wounds with gentle thoroughness. His touch was careful, clinical, but she could feel the effort it cost him to maintain that control. "They're not deep," he murmured, reaching for a first aid kit, "but they need to be cleaned." The antiseptic stung, but she barely felt it. All her attention was focused on him, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the careful steadiness of his hands, the warmth of his body so close to hers. "There," he said, applying the last bandage. "Good as new." He should have stepped back then, put distance between them. Instead, his hands lingered on hers, thumbs tracing over her knuckles. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for coming after me, for risking yourself to save someone you barely know. I know you." The words surprised her with their certainty. Maybe not your history, or your favorite color, or what you like for breakfast, but I know you. The bond makes sure of that. His eyes darkened. "What does it tell you?" She thought about the flashes of emotion and sensation she'd felt through their connection, the weight of responsibility he carried, the loneliness that had eaten at him for years, the way he'd built walls around himself to protect others from his darker nature. "That you're tired of being alone," she said softly. "That you never expected to find someone who could match your intensity. That you're afraid you'll break me." He went very still. "And what do you think?" She stepped closer, closing the distance between them until she could feel his breath on her face. "I think you underestimate what I can handle." The last thread of his control snapped.
He kissed her like he was drowning and she was air itself. His hands tangled in her damp hair, angling her head so he could deepen the kiss, claiming her mouth with desperate intensity. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. The mate bond flared between them, a connection so intimate she could barely tell where she ended and he began. "Elara," he ground against her lips. "If we do this, there's no going back. The bond will solidify. You'll be mine, and I'll be yours for as long as we both draw breath." "I'm already yours," she whispered, the truth of it settling into her bones. "I have been, since the moment I stepped into your forest." Something raw and vulnerable flashed across his face. Then he was moving, lifting her onto the bathroom counter, his body settling between her thighs. She could feel the hard length of him pressed against her core, separated only by denim and cotton. His mouth found her throat, teeth scraping over her pulse point. The sensation sent liquid fire racing through her veins, pooling between her legs with an intensity that left her gasping. "I need to mark you," he said against her skin, his voice rough with strain. "The wolf won't be satisfied until everyone knows you belong to me." "Then do it," she breathed, tilting her head to give him better access. His teeth sank into the juncture of her neck and shoulder, not enough to break the skin, but enough to leave his mark. The claiming bite sent shockwaves of pleasure through her entire body, and she cried out, her back arching. The mate bond exploded between them, a connection so complete and overwhelming that for a moment she lost herself entirely. She was him, and he was her, two souls becoming one in the most fundamental way possible. His hands moved with desperate urgency, peeling away her shirt, his mouth following the path of newly exposed skin. Every touch, every kiss, every brush of his fingers against her heated flesh sent sparks through the bond between them. "You're so beautiful," he murmured against her collarbone, his voice thick with wonder and need. "So perfect. Mine." She could only moan in response, her hands fumbling with the buttons of his shirt, desperate to feel skin against skin. When the fabric finally gave way, she pressed her palms flat against his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her touch. The sensation of flesh against flesh was electric, the mate bond singing with approval. Through their connection, she felt his overwhelming need, his desperate love, the way she completed something in him that had been broken for so long.
"Kael," she gasped as his mouth moved lower, as his hands found the clasp of her bra and freed her completely to his touch. "Please." He lifted his head to look at her, his golden eyes blazing with possession and tenderness in equal measure. "Tell me you want this. Tell me you want me to claim you completely." "Yes," she breathed, pulling him down to her. "Yes, claim me. Make me yours in every way." The words unleashed something primal in him. His mouth crashed down on hers as his hands worked at the remaining barriers between them, fabric disappearing with urgent efficiency until nothing separated them but air and anticipation. When he finally joined with her, when their bodies merged as completely as their souls already had, the mate bond flared to life with such intensity that the bathroom lights flickered. She cried out, her nails digging into his shoulders, as pleasure, unlike anything she'd ever experienced, crashed over her in waves. Through the bond, she felt his own overwhelming sensation, felt the moment when his wolf finally, completely claimed its mate. The dual experience was almost too much to bear, pleasure building on pleasure until she was sobbing his name, her body trembling with the force of her release. He followed her over the edge with a growl that was more wolf than man, his body shuddering as he spent himself inside her, marking her in the most primal way possible. For long moments afterward, they held each other in the steamy bathroom, hearts racing, breath coming in ragged gasps. The mate bond hummed between them, satisfied and complete, binding them together in ways that went deeper than the physical. "Mine," he whispered against her neck, the word a prayer and a promise. "Yours," she agreed, and felt the last of her resistance crumble. Whatever came next, Victor's war, the pack's judgment, the mystery of what she was becoming, they would face it together. The bond wouldn't allow anything else. For the first time in her life, Elara felt truly complete. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. Dawn brought no peace. Elara woke wrapped in Kael's arms, her body deliciously sore from their claiming. The mark on her neck throbbed with a pleasant ache, and she could feel the mate bond humming contentedly between them like a satisfied cat. But the contentment was short-lived. Voices carried from downstairs, angry, concerned voices that belonged to the pack. She could make out Marcus's steady baritone, but there were others too, voices she didn't recognize, but whose hostility was unmistakable. Kael stirred beside her, his arm tightening around her waist. His eyes opened, immediately alert in the way of predators,
and she saw the exact moment he processed what he was hearing. "Pack meeting," he said grimly. "About you." The words sent ice through her veins. "They don't approve?" "Some of them." He sat up, running a hand through his dark hair. In the morning light, she could see the healing claw marks on his chest, already faded to thin pink lines. A human mate challenges everything they believe about pack hierarchy. "And what do you believe?" He looked down at her, his golden eyes intense. "I believe the moon doesn't make mistakes. You saved my life last night, fought beside us like a born pack member. That means something. But I'm not the only voice that matters. An alpha leads by consensus, not decree. If the pack can't accept you..." He didn't finish the sentence, but she heard the unspoken threat. If the pack rejected her, their bond would become a weakness that could tear the Shadowmoon pack apart. "Get dressed," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Whatever happens down there, we face it together." 20 minutes later, they descended into what felt like a war council. The living room was packed with pack members, men and women of various ages, all carrying the same preternatural stillness that marked them as predators. Marcus stood near the fireplace, his expression carefully neutral. Beside him was a woman with steel gray hair and eyes like winter storms, clearly someone with significant authority. An elderly man with scarred hands sat in the corner, and 3 younger wolves clustered near the windows. All conversations stopped when Kael entered, Elara close behind him. The weight of their scrutiny was almost physical, pressing against her from all sides. "Alpha," the gray-haired woman said, inclining her head slightly, "we need to discuss the implications of your bonding."
"Her name is Elara," Kael said coolly, "and she's my mate. That's all you need to know." "Is it?" The woman's eyes shifted to Elara, assessing and cold. "A human mate weakens the pack, makes us vulnerable to challenges from other alphas. Victor will see this as proof that our bloodline is corrupted." "Victor saw our strength last night," Elara said, finding her voice, despite the hostility in the room, "when we drove his forces back into the forest." "You mean when Kael nearly died protecting you?" The accusation came from one of the younger wolves, a man with prematurely gray hair and bitter eyes. "You're a liability, human, a weakness he can't afford." Kael moved faster than thought, crossing the room to grip the man by the throat. "Careful, Logan. That's my mate you're speaking to." "She's human!" Logan snarled, though he didn't try to break free. "She doesn't belong here." "Neither did you once." The quiet voice came from the elderly man in the corner. All eyes turned to him, and he continued calmly. "Logan was a bite-turned wolf, not born pack. We accepted him. Why is her situation different?" "Because she's not even turned," the gray-haired woman, who Elara was beginning to suspect was the pack's elder or beta female, said harshly. "She's just human with a mate bond that shouldn't exist." "Is she?" Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice thoughtful. "Last night, she moved through the forest in a storm like she was born to it. She found the battle by instinct alone. She struck true against a wolf in full combat fury, something that should have been impossible for an untrained human." "What are you suggesting?" Kael asked, though something in his expression suggested he already knew. "I'm suggesting," Marcus said carefully, "that maybe she's not entirely human. Maybe she's something else, something that's been sleeping, waiting for the right trigger." The room went dead silent. Elara felt every eye in the room focused on her, studying her with new intensity. "That's impossible," Logan breathed. "Is it?" The elder rose from his chair, moving to stand before Elara. Up close, she could see that his scars weren't random. They formed patterns, ritual markings. Child, what do you know of your family history? Not much, Elara admitted. I was adopted. My birth parents died when I was a baby.
How did they die? Something cold settled in her stomach. A car accident, at least that's what I was told. The elder and Marcus exchanged meaningful looks. There are stories, the elder said slowly, of dormant bloodlines, wolves whose heritage was hidden or forgotten, who lived as humans until something awakened their true nature. The mate bond would be a powerful enough trigger. You're talking about a late shift, the gray-haired woman said, her hostility shifting to fascination. Those are myths. Are they? Kael's voice was tight with possibility. It would explain everything. The bond, her ability to feel the pack's pain, her instincts in battle. Elara's world tilted. You think I'm part wolf? I think, the elder said gently, that there's more to your story than anyone realized, including you. Before anyone could respond, a howl cut through the morning air, long, mournful, and full of warning. Every wolf in the room went rigid, their heads turning toward the sound. Perimeter breach, Marcus said grimly. Southwest border. Victor, Kael demanded. Another howl answered, closer this time. But it wasn't the sound of attack. It was a call for parley. He wants to talk, the elder said. That's unexpected. Kael's jaw clenched. He knows about the mate bond. He's coming to test our strength, see if the rumors of weakness are true. Then we show him strength, Elara said, surprising herself. All of us, together. The pack looked at her with new respect, and she felt something shift in the room's dynamics. She wasn't just Kael's human mate anymore. She was potentially pack, potentially one of them. The alpha's mate speaks wisdom, the elder said formally. Whatever Victor wants, we face him as one pack, united. Kael nodded, his hand finding Elara's. Through their bond, she felt his pride, his love, and underneath it all, his absolute determination to protect what was his.
Then let's go meet our uninvited guest, he said grimly, and show him what happens when someone threatens a Shadowmoon wolf. The pack began to file out, moving with the coordinated grace of a hunting party. But Elara lingered, the elder's words echoing in her mind. Dormant bloodlines, late shift, more to your story. Maybe she really wasn't human. Maybe she never had been. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. Chapter 8. The Challenge. Victor Bloodfang was everything Elara had imagined a rival alpha would be, and worse. He stood in the center of the clearing where last night's battle had taken place, flanked by 6 of his largest wolves. Even in human form, he radiated menace. Tall and broad-shouldered, with platinum blonde hair and pale blue eyes that held all the warmth of Arctic ice, he looked like a Viking berserker reborn. But it was his smile that made Elara's skin crawl. It was the smile of a predator who'd cornered wounded prey. "Kael Shadowmoon," Victor called out as the pack approached. "You look tired. Rough night?" "Nothing I couldn't handle," Kael replied evenly, but Elara could feel his tension through the mate bond. This wasn't just posturing. Victor's presence here was a direct challenge to pack law. "Am I?" Victor spread his arms wide, a gesture of mock innocence. "I thought perhaps you'd abandoned it. After all, what use does a pack have for an alpha who's been compromised?" The word dripped with disdain, and Elara felt rage flare through the mate bond. Not just Kael's, but her own. The arrogance of this bastard, coming onto their land, threatening their bond. "Choose your next words carefully," Kael warned, his voice deadly quiet.
"Oh, I choose them very carefully indeed." Victor took a step forward, his wolves moving with him in perfect synchronization.
I challenge the strength of your leadership, Shadowmoon. I challenge your right to this territory. A formal challenge. The pack behind Kael went rigid with shock and fury. According to supernatural law, Victor had every right to make such a challenge, and Kael had to accept. On what grounds? Marcus demanded. Weakness. Victor's eyes never left Kael's face. An alpha who bonds with a human shows compromised judgment. An alpha who risks his pack for the sake of one fragile female shows compromised priorities. And an alpha who attacks under cover of storm shows compromised honor, Elara said, stepping forward despite Kael's sharp intake of breath. Victor's attention shifted to her, and she felt the full weight of his predatory focus. The human speaks. How amusing. The human has a name, she said coolly, and she's not impressed by playground bullies who hide behind pack law when they can't win a fair fight. The insult hit its mark. Victor's pleasant mask slipped, revealing the snarling beast beneath. Careful, little lamb. You're standing among wolves now. No, Elara said, feeling something wild and fierce unfurling in her chest. I'm standing among my pack, and we don't bow to cowards. The word seemed to resonate through the assembled wolves. She felt their approval, their acceptance washing over her like a wave. Whatever she was, human, part wolf, something else entirely, she belonged here. Victor's expression darkened. Then perhaps a demonstration is in order. Single combat, as is traditional. Alpha against alpha. Accepted, Kael said immediately. But, Victor continued, his smile returning, with a modification. The winner claims not just territory, but the defeated alpha's mate as well. The clearing erupted. Kael's wolves snarled their outrage, while Victor's pack laughed. A sound like breaking glass. But beneath the chaos, Elara felt something else awakening in her blood, something hot and primal and utterly furious. You want to bet on me like a piece of property? She asked, her voice eerily calm.
Victor's smile widened. I want to show your mate what happens when weakness masquerades as strength. That was when Elara felt it, the first crack in whatever had been holding her true nature dormant. Heat flowed through her veins like molten gold, and suddenly she could smell everything with crystal clarity. The pack's emotions, the morning dew on the grass, the metallic scent of violence waiting to happen. And underneath it all, her own scent, no longer entirely human. Counter-proposal, she said, her voice carrying new authority. You want to challenge pack strength? Then face the pack. All of us. Elara, Kael warned, but she held up a hand. I'm not property to be won or lost, she continued, addressing Victor directly. I'm pack, and if you want to test our strength, you'll face us as we truly are, united. Victor laughed, but there was uncertainty in his eyes now. A human cannot make pack challenges. Can't I? Elara felt the heat in her veins intensify, felt something fundamental shifting inside her. Or are you afraid to find out what I really am? The elder stepped forward, his scarred face grave. The female speaks pack law truly. If she claims pack membership, she has the right to call for group defense. She's human, one of Victor's wolves protested. Is she? Marcus asked quietly. Look at her scent, her posture, the way she moves. Does she smell human to you? As if summoned by his words,
Another wave of change washed over Elara. Her senses sharpened further, and she could suddenly feel every heartbeat in the clearing, could taste the fear creeping into Victor's confidence. "What are you?" Victor demanded, his composure finally cracking. Elara smiled and felt her canines elongate slightly, not a full shift, but enough to prove a point. "I'm exactly what Kael said I was. His mate, his equal, his partner." She turned to address both packs, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing. "I claim pack membership by right of mate bond and blood awakening. I call for group defense against territorial challenge." The formal words felt right on her tongue, as if she'd always known them.
Victor snarled, realizing his mistake. He'd expected to face one alpha in single combat. Now he faced an entire pack united behind their leaders. The odds had shifted dramatically. "This is not over, Shadowmoon," he growled, signaling his wolves to withdraw. "No," Kael agreed, moving to stand beside Elara. "It's not. But when you come back, you'll face us both, Alpha and Luna, as it should be." Luna, the female alpha. The word resonated through Elara like a bell, and she felt the last barriers inside her crumble. Whatever she'd been before, whoever she'd thought she was, it didn't matter now. She was Kael's mate, Luna of the Shadowmoon pack, and she was finally, truly home. Victor and his wolves melted back into the forest, but not before their leader called back one final threat. "This isn't finished." "Let him come," Elara said, her hand finding Kael's. "We'll be ready." And through the mate bond, she felt his absolute certainty that they would be. Chapter 9. Luna Rising. The pack's acceptance came in stages. First, there was the formal recognition ceremony that night. Under the full moon, with the entire pack gathered in a sacred circle, the elder, whose name Elara learned was Thorn, spoke the ancient words that bound her officially to the Shadowmoon bloodline. By mate bond, forged in storm and battle, by blood awakened in defensive pack, by choice freely made in the face of danger, his voice carried across the clearing. "We recognize Elara as Luna, alpha female, keeper of pack law and guardian of our young." The howl that rose from 30 wolf throats was like music, primal and beautiful and completely right. When Kael threw back his head to add his voice to the song, Elara felt an overwhelming urge to do the same. The sound that came from her throat wasn't quite human, wasn't quite wolf, but it was definitely hers, and when the pack answered with approval, she knew she had found her place in the world. Later, as the celebration wound down, she and Kael walked the perimeter of their territory. The mate bond hummed contentedly between them, but there was still so much they needed to discuss. "What happens now?" she asked, her hand intertwined with his. "Now you learn what it really means to be Luna," he said. "Pack law, territory management, conflict resolution, and we figure out exactly what you're becoming." The changes were still happening. Over the past few days, her senses had continued to sharpen. Her reflexes quickened, her strength increased. She wasn't fully wolf, might never be, but she was definitely no longer human. "And Victor?" Kael's expression hardened. "He'll be back. Today's retreat was tactical, not defeat. He'll regroup, bring allies, try to find another angle of attack." "Good," Elara said, surprising him. "I'm looking forward to it." He stopped walking, turning to study her face in the moonlight. "You mean that?" "I do." She faced him fully, letting him see the fierce determination in her eyes. "This is my pack now, Kael. My family, my territory, and I protect what's mine." The possessiveness in her voice made his eyes flash gold. "Our territory, our pack." "Our territory," she agreed, then smiled with newly sharp teeth. "But my alpha." "Yours," he confirmed, pulling her close. Always yours. When he kissed her this time, it was different from their desperate claiming. This was recognition, acceptance, the sealing of a partnership that would reshape both their lives. "I love you," he said against her lips, the first time either of them had spoken the words aloud. "I love you too," she replied, and felt the mate bond flare with golden light between them. My alpha. My mate. My choice. In the distance, a rival wolf howled. Victor's pack, still circling, still threatening, but Elara felt no fear, only anticipation. And whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Chapter 10. The Forging. The following 6 months were a crucible. Elara's transformation was not a single event, but a relentless tide. Some mornings she woke, her senses so acute she could hear the sap rising in the trees a mile away. Other days, a primal rage would surface at the slightest provocation, a feral echo of the wolf she was becoming, and it took every ounce of Kael's calming presence through the bond to soothe the storm inside her. She learned to fight not as a human, but as a predator. Marcus, once skeptical, became her most dedicated instructor, teaching her to use her smaller size and shocking speed as weapons. She learned to anticipate a wolf's movement, to sense the shift in the air before a strike, to use the terrain as a second skin. But her true value to the pack wasn't just her claws, it was her mind. Her human intellect, now fused with lupine instinct, became their greatest strategic asset. While Kael's strength was an unbreakable wall, Elara's was a shifting, cunning river. She spent days with Thorn, the elder, learning pack history and law, and nights with Kael, poring over maps of their territory until she knew every ridge and stream blindfolded. She was no longer Kael's human mate, a problem to be solved. She was their Luna, and the pack's respect for her was no longer given out of duty to their alpha, but earned through her own grit and cunning. The bond with Kael deepened into something unshakable. It was more than passion. It was a constant, humming awareness of the other. They could communicate across the compound with a thought, a feeling. He was her anchor when the wolf threatened to overwhelm her, and she was her compass. Her newfound instincts often guided them to game or warning of hidden dangers. One evening, as they stood on the battlements watching the sunset paint the forest in fire, Kael's hand found hers. "He's coming," Kael said, his voice low. The message had come through the pack link an hour before. Victor was on the move, his forces bolstered by 2 allied packs. Elara didn't flinch. She simply nodded, her amber eyes, which now held a permanent golden flicker, scanning the horizon. "I know. Let him. The traps are set. The packs are in position." He looked down at her, his fierce, beautiful mate who had remade herself for him, for them. "You're not afraid?" "I was always afraid," she said softly, leaning into his side. "Afraid of a life that didn't fit. Afraid of being ordinary. This?" She gestured to the vast wild territories spread out before them. "This is the least afraid I've ever been, because this is where I belong, with you." He kissed her then under the dying sun as the forest held its breath, waiting for the dawn. Chapter 11. The Reckoning. The attack came at dawn, as Elara had predicted it would. Victor brought 3 allied packs with him, nearly 100 wolves against Shadowmoon's 30. By all tactical measures, it should have been a slaughter. It wasn't. Elara was the nexus of their defense, her mind connected to the entire pack. She stood beside Kael on a strategic overlook, not as a protected queen, but as a field general. "Northern force is moving through the ravine,"
she reported, her voice calm in their shared mental link. "Marcus, take your team through the old mine entrance. Hit them from behind. Now." "Southern approach?" Kael's mental voice was a steady rumble in her mind. "Blocked by the landslide we triggered yesterday. They'll have to come up the main trail." She smiled, a sharp, predatory expression. "Right into the trap. Logan's team is ready with the nets and stakes." The battle was fierce but brutally efficient. Victor had counted on overwhelming numbers and surprise. He hadn't counted on facing an enemy who knew every advantage the terrain could offer, led by a Luna's mind whose tactical mind was as sharp as her newly manifested claws. When a flank of wolves broke through the tree line, aiming straight for them, it was Elara who moved first. With a snarl that was entirely wolf, she met them, a whirlwind of calculated violence. She didn't fight with brute strength, she used their momentum against them, a blur of motion that left two wolves dazed and disoriented before Kael finished them with devastating power. They fought back to back, Alpha and Luna, a perfect deadly dance. The mate bond sang between them, a symphony of coordinated movement and shared purpose. When the sun rose fully, Victor's alliance was shattered. Two of the allied packs had surrendered outright, their alphas recognizing Shadowmoon's strength. The third had fled with Victor himself, disappearing back into the deep forest. "It's over," Marcus said, breathing heavily as he surveyed the aftermath. "They won't be back." "This group won't," Elara agreed, accepting a clean shirt from one of the pack females. Her own was shredded from the partial shift she'd undergone during combat. "But there will be others." "Let them come," Kael said, his arms sliding around her waist, pulling her bloodied but triumphant form against his side. He looked at her not with protection, but with pride. "We'll be ready." She leaned into his warmth, feeling the contentment of the pack through their shared bonds. Safe territory, united family, and beside her, the mate who'd showed her who she truly was. "Yes," she said, her eyes already scanning the forest for future threats. A Luna in every sense of the word. "We will be." The wild had called to her once, drawing her into a forest where everything changed. Now she was the wild, Luna of the Shadowmoon pack, protector of her people, and eternally bonded to the alpha who'd claimed her heart. It was exactly where she belonged. The end.
If this story captured your heart, then subscribe to the channel and tap the bell. That's how you'll never miss your next epic romance. Want to share this journey with a friend who loves fated mates and alpha heroes as much as you do? Share this video and get lost in the story together. We live for your reactions. Tell us in the comments, who was your favorite character? Until the next chronicle, I'm Georgina. Thank you for listening.